The first sign that my marriage was falling apart wasn't a lipstick stain, a suspicious text, or a late-night phone call. It was a rent discount. I remember standing in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning, holding our rent statement and staring at the number. The rent was almost 40% lower than usual. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Our landlord, Harlan, wasn't known for generosity. If anything, he was famous for squeezing every dollar he could from his tenants. When my wife Melissa walked into the kitchen, I showed her the statement. "Did you know about this?" She glanced at it for less than a second. "Oh yeah? Harlan said there were some issues with the building, so everyone got a discount this month." Then she poured herself coffee and changed the subject. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. But something about her answer bothered me. That afternoon, I knocked on my neighbor's door. Mrs. Bell was 72 years old and had lived in the building longer than anyone else. I casually asked if she had received the same discount. She laughed. "What discount? My rent went up last week." My stomach dropped. I checked with 2 more tenants. Same answer. Nobody received a discount. Nobody except us. Suddenly, Melissa's explanation didn't make sense anymore. Over the following weeks, I started noticing things I'd ignored before. Melissa was spending more time away from home. She guarded her phone like it contained state secrets. She always seemed distracted whenever I talked about finances. And every time Harlan's name came up, she became strangely defensive. One evening I got home early from work. Melissa wasn't there. Her car wasn't there either. I called her. No answer. An hour later, I called again. Still nothing. 3 hours later, she finally answered. "I'm shopping with a friend," she said. But I could hear traffic and a man's voice in the background. When she got home, she acted like nothing happened. That's when I knew. I didn't have proof, but I knew. The next night, after she fell asleep, I picked up her phone. My hands were shaking. Part of me hoped I was wrong. Part of me prayed I was imagining everything. I unlocked the phone, and my entire world shattered. There were hundreds of messages between Melissa and Harlan. At first, they looked harmless. Then they became flirtatious. Then they became intimate. Then they became impossible to misunderstand. One message read, "Don't worry about next month's rent. I'll take care of it." Melissa replied, "Thank you. I'll make it worth it." I felt physically sick. I kept scrolling. Hotel reservations, dinner photos, private jokes, messages sent while I was working overtime to support our household. Then I found the final piece of evidence. A selfie. Melissa and Harlan sitting together in a hotel room. His arm wrapped around her waist. Her head resting on his shoulder. Both of them smiling. I stared at that picture for what felt like hours. The woman I trusted more than anyone had sold our marriage for a cheaper rent payment. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat alone in my car until sunrise. At first, I wanted to confront her. I wanted answers. I wanted explanations. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized explanations wouldn't change anything. She made her choice. Now I was going to make mine. For the next 2 weeks, I pretended everything was normal. I smiled. I laughed. I acted like the same husband she'd always known. Meanwhile, I was gathering evidence. Screenshots, messages, photos, bank records, everything. Then I hired a private investigator. What he discovered shocked me. Melissa wasn't the only woman involved. Harlan had a pattern. Whenever female tenants struggled financially, he'd offer discounts, payment extensions, and special deals. In return, he expected something personal. Some women refused. Others didn't. Harlan had spent years abusing his position. And because most victims felt ashamed, nobody spoke up. The investigator also uncovered financial fraud. Harlan was stealing money from the property company, creating fake repair invoices, moving funds into personal accounts, covering his tracks with forged paperwork. Suddenly, this wasn't just an affair anymore. It was a criminal operation. And I had proof. I contacted an attorney. Then I contacted the property management company. Finally, I contacted a local journalist known for exposing corruption. I handed over everything. The evidence, the screenshots, the financial records, the witness statements. Then I waited. 3 weeks later, everything exploded. The property company launched an investigation. Several tenants came forward. The journalist published the first article. Within hours, reporters were calling Harlan nonstop. Then came the lawsuits. Then came the audits. Then came the criminal investigation. His entire empire began collapsing around him. And the best part? He never saw it coming. One evening, Melissa walked into the apartment holding a newspaper. Her face was pale. Her hands were shaking. The headline featured Harlan's photo. His business practices were being exposed publicly. She looked directly at me. "You did this." I didn't answer. "You ruined him." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. "No," I said. "He ruined himself." Tears filled her eyes. She tried explaining. She said she felt lonely. She said she felt neglected. She said she never meant for things to go this far. But every excuse sounded weaker than the last. Because none of them explained the lies. None of them explained the cheating. None of them explained why she betrayed me over and over again. Finally, I asked one question. Was the discount worth it? She looked away. And that silence told me everything. A few days later, I filed for divorce. For the first time since discovering the affair, Melissa panicked. She begged me to reconsider. She promised she'd change. She promised she'd never speak to Harlan again. She promised anything she thought I wanted to hear. But trust doesn't come back because someone gets caught. Trust doesn't magically return because they're sorry. Sometimes people only regret their actions when the consequences arrive. And by then, it's too late. The divorce moved quickly. The evidence left little room for argument. I moved into a small apartment across town and started rebuilding my life. Months passed. The investigation into Harlan continued. More victims came forward. More evidence surfaced. More lawsuits followed. Eventually, he lost most of his properties. His wife filed for divorce. Several business partners cut ties with him. His reputation was destroyed. Everything he'd spent years building disappeared. One poor decision at a time. As for Melissa, life didn't turn out the way she expected either. The relationship she'd risked everything for ended almost immediately. Once Harlan's money and influence disappeared, so did the fantasy. She was left alone with the consequences of her choices. About a year after the divorce, I received a letter. The handwriting was instantly familiar. Melissa. Inside was a long apology. She admitted she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. She admitted she'd destroyed our marriage. She admitted she'd traded something real for something temporary. At the bottom of the page, she wrote, "I wish I could go back and choose differently." I read the letter once. Then I folded it, walked to the kitchen, and threw it away. Not because I hated her. Not because I was still angry. But because I had finally moved on. The truth is, revenge isn't always about making someone suffer. Sometimes revenge is simply refusing to let their betrayal define the rest of your life. While Melissa and Harlan were busy destroying everything they had, I was rebuilding. I focused on my career. I reconnected with friends. I started traveling. I learned how peaceful life could be when you no longer lived with lies. Looking back now, I don't think about the affair very often. I don't think about the rent discount. I don't think about Harlan. And I certainly don't think about Melissa. Because eventually I realized something important. They didn't lose because I exposed them. They lost because their entire relationship was built on selfishness, dishonesty, and greed. People like that always destroy themselves eventually. I just happened to speed up the process. And in the end, I walked away with something far more valuable than revenge. I walked away with my freedom. And that's the one thing they never expected.